Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks. This time I will be doing The Secret Bedroom by R.L. Stine. It's a Fear Street novel. I got a request for this, so I will be doing this to fulfill that request. I don't know anything at all about this book. I guess there's a secret bedroom in someone's house on Fear Street. There you go. That's what the front cover says. We're going to go with that. I didn't really read through this book yet. I have not done my usual thing where I go through and I find the characters and try to give them voices. I am just going to wing it. I don't know how many characters are in this book. I don't know who has a voice or not. We're going to just go in raw and hope for the best and have some fun at it. Let's get started. If you want to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I love seeing your comments. What should I do next? Let me know. I'm always looking for the next book to do, to steer the way that the show goes. And if you request it and I haven't already done it and scheduled it, I'll do it next. So, let's begin. Feel free to tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me, tell them Tales from Fear Street. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Secret Bedroom by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street novel, Book 13, Chapter 1. Leah Carson tripped and her lunch tray went flying out of her hands. As she struggled to regain her balance, she watched the tray sail toward a crowded table. Almost as if it were happening in slow motion, Leah saw it hit the side of a girl's chair. Then she watched helplessly as the bowl toppled off the tray, and the dark chili poured onto the sleeve of the girl's white sweater. The girl screamed and leapt to her feet, her hands flying up like two startled white birds trying to escape. She shook her shoulders, then began grabbing at her sleeve, pulling off red beans and chunks of tomato. The girl turned angrily toward Leah. Everyone at the table, a couple of astonished-looking boys, and a girl with a disapproving frown, turned to glare at Leah. Leah could feel her face reddening, growing hot. Why did I have to take chili, she thought. Why couldn't I have just picked a sandwich? My new sweater, the girl cried, still scraping and pulling at the sleeve. She had wavy red hair, cut stylishly short, and pale blue eyes that flashed angrily at Leah, then back to her sweater. I'm sorry, Leah managed to say. There was something wet on the floor. I slipped. I'd better go put some cold water on it, the girl said, ignoring Leah's apology, ignoring Leah entirely. She turned and stalked past Leah, deliberately staring straight ahead. I'm really sorry, Leah called after her. Holding her stained sweater sleeve, the girl hurried through the lunchroom doors without turning back. Leah heard laughter at another table and knew they were laughing at her. She bent down to pick up her tray, feeling all eyes on her. I just want to die, she thought. Only my second week at this school, and I've already made a total fool of myself. It was hard enough, she thought, for someone as shy as she was to adjust to a new high school, to make new friends, to feel comfortable. Sure, she was pretty enough, cute, everyone said, with her sparkling green eyes, and her dark brown hair cut in a shaggy pixie style, with bangs that grazed her eyebrows. Leah has a great smile, everyone always said. Her smile lights up her face. Well, she hadn't had much to smile about at Shadyside High. The kids all seemed so snooty and stuck up, and now she had tripped in front of half the school and poured chili all over that red-haired girl in the white sweater. Here, a voice said, startling Leah from her thoughts. Have a handful of salad. Oh? It was one of the boys from the table. He had picked up Leah's tray and was scooping up the remains of her lunch. Thanks, Leah said uncertainly. He grinned at her as she took the tray from him. She could feel her face grow hot again. He's cute, Leah thought. Not really handsome, but cute. He had a friendly, open face with curly brown hair and brown eyes. He was short, like Leah, not very muscular, very boyish-looking. He was wearing a maroon and gray Shadyside High sweatshirt over faded jeans. He retrieved Leah's silverware from the floor and deposited it on the tray. That looked like good chili, he said, still grinning. They were both squatting down below the tabletop, Leah holding the tray as he continued tossing lunch remains on it. Leah licked her lips, a nervous habit she just couldn't break. I slipped, she said. Well, duh, she thought. That was pretty obvious, wasn't it? Marcy'll get over it, he said reassuringly. But then he added, in 100 years or so. His grin faded. She was really mad, Leah said. That's obvious, too, she scolded herself. Why do you have to sound like such a dweeb? She's a redhead, he said, as if that explained anything. They both stood up. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked to the lunchroom door. Marcy hadn't returned. The other kids at the table had left. You're new here, he said, staring into her eyes, studying her. Yeah, this is my second week, Leah said uncomfortably, holding on to the tray with both hands. Next week will probably be better, she added wryly. What's your name? Leah Carson. I don't know any Leahs, he said, pulling the bottom of the sweatshirt down over his wiry frame. I'm Don Jacobs. You've probably heard of me. I'm the guy who picks a salad up from the floor. Leah laughed. He waited for her to say something, but she couldn't think of anything to say. I hate being shy, she thought. Hate it, hate it, hate it. He looked toward the lunchroom door again, then back to her. You a senior? No, junior. Whose homeroom? She licked her lips. She had to think. Mr. Robbins? Where do you live? On Fear Street, Leah told him, a few blocks from the old cemetery. Fear Street? Leah was already used to this startled reaction from people when they heard where she lived. My parents just love to fix up old houses, she explained. When my dad was transferred here to Shadyside, they bought the shabbiest place they could find. They'll spend years making it beautiful, and then he'll be transferred again. Leah sighed and glanced at a table by the wall, where Dina Martinson, her lunch spread out in front of her, gave Leah a little wave. She followed it up with a wide-eyed look of surprise when she noticed who Leah was with. So far, Dina was the only friend Leah had made at Shadyside. My friend is waving at me, she told Don awkwardly. It's getting late. I'd better get a new lunch and join her. I hear the chili's real good, he said with a straight face. Thanks for helping me, Leah said. She started to move toward the food line, but he reached out and held her arm. Since you're new here and everything, he said, his eyes darting toward the doorway. Would you like to go to a movie or something Saturday night? He scratched his curly brown hair and gave her his most winning, boyish grin. Leah was practically startled speechless, but she managed to utter a yes. She stood awkwardly grinning at him, trying to think of something else to say. Good, he said, but then his expression quickly changed. Leah followed his gaze to the doorway, where Marcy stood, arms crossed over her chest, glaring at the two of them. Later, Don said, and hurried off to join Marcy. Leah hurried to the food line. Maybe my lonely days here are over, she thought happily, her hands unsteady as she dropped the soiled tray onto the pile and took a clean one. Thinking about Don, about how funny he looked scrounging around on the floor to help retrieve her lunch, she picked up a tuna fish sandwich and a box of apple juice and hurried to join Dina. What were you and Don Jacobs talking about? Dina asked, wiping crumbs off her chin with a paper napkin. Oh, mainly about how I spilled my lunch all over that girl standing there in a doorway with him, Leah told her, plopping down across the table from her. You spilled your lunch on Marcy Hendricks, and I missed it? Dina cried with an expression of exaggerated disappointment. Dina had a fragile-looking heart-shaped face, framed by very fine blonde hair that she wore down to her collar. She was always complaining about how pale she was and how she couldn't do anything with her hair because it was so fine, but she was actually very pretty. Dina had probably always played an angel in the elementary school Christmas pageants, Leah thought on first meeting her. Don seems nice, Leah said, taking a tentative bite of her sandwich, trying to decide whether or not to tell Dina that he'd asked her out for Saturday night. Finally, she decided there was no way she could keep from telling her. He's very nice, Dina said, watching over Leah's shoulder as Marcy and Don talked heatedly in the lunchroom doorway. Everyone likes Don. He's just one of those guys when you meet him, you like him. He has a million friends. And girlfriends? Leah asked. Just Marcy. Dina turned her glance on Leah. Don and Marcy, she said, making a face. Man, does she keep him on a tight leash. Huh? Leah practically choked on her sandwich. They've been going together since we were back in preschool, I think, Dina said, her eyes back to the doorway in time to see Marcy storm off, Don scurrying after her. He asked me out, Leah revealed in a low voice, even though no one else was nearby. Who? Don? Leah nodded, her bangs flying up, then dropping back in place on her forehead. Just now. Dina's delicate mouth formed an O of surprise. Yeah, just now. He asked me out just now. Leah had to laugh at her new friend's astonished expression. Dina reached across the table and tapped the back of Leah's hand with one finger. "Watch out for Marcy," she warned. "Dina, come on, I'm sure Don—" "Just watch out for her," Dina repeated seriously. Leah twisted around to check out the lunchroom doorway. Several kids were leaving. The lunchroom was clearing out. It was just about time for the bell for fifth period to ring. "What did you spill on her?" Dina asked, sliding her chair back and standing up. "Chili," Leah said, starting to feel embarrassed all over again. "On that white cashmere sweater she was wearing?" "It was cashmere?" Leah cried, horrified. To Leah's surprise, Dina was laughing. "It's not funny," Leah said. "I was mortified." "It is funny, if you know Marcy," was Dina's explanation. They walked to their lockers, Dina still chuckling and shaking her head, Leah thinking about Don, wondering why he had asked her out if he and Marcy had been a couple for so long. "See you later," Dina said, heading down the hall to her class. But Leah didn't hear her. She was thinking about Marcy and Dina's warning to watch out for her, and she was wondering if she hadn't already made an enemy on this, her second week in school. Chapter 2. Leah's house loomed in front of her like some dark monster in a horror movie. It's just as old and creepy in the afternoon as it is at night, Leah realized, shifting her backpack from one shoulder to the other and starting up the broken flagstone walk to the front door. Above her, two windows on the second floor, her bedroom windows, caught the glow of the late afternoon sun and seemed to light up. Like two evil eyes, she thought. The house sees me coming home to it after school and opens its eyes. And now I'm about to step into its gaping dark mouth. Chill out, Leah, she told herself. Let's not be overly dramatic. So the house is big and ramshackle and a wreck. That doesn't make it evil, even if it is on Fear Street. She unlocked the front door, struggling with the still unfamiliar lock, and stepped into the dark front hallway. It was warm in the house, despite the cool autumn air outside, warm and damp, with that sour, musty smell some old houses have. Why on earth do Mom and Dad have to like these old places, she asked herself, the floorboards creaking under her feet as she tossed her backpack down and made her way through the empty house to the kitchen to get a snack. Sitting at the table in the small breakfast alcove, the flowered wallpaper stained and peeling, Leah spooned blueberry yogurt from a container into a bowl and thought about the first time she had seen the house, less than a month earlier. It had been an afternoon much like this one, cool, breezy, the feel of autumn in the air, despite the bright yellow sun high in the sky. The light, it had seemed to Leah, was cut off as soon as the real estate agent led them into the house, closing the front door behind her. It was as if someone had turned off a bright flashlight, Leah remembered, as if the house was turning away the sunlight, shutting it out, covering them in its warm darkness. She had immediately been appalled by the age-stained walls, the dust-blanketed windows, the warped moldings, the threadbare old carpets covering the creaking floors, the smell of it, the feel of it. Her parents, of course, had immediately fallen in love with it. "It's charming," Mr. Carson had said. "Think of all we can do here," Mrs. Carson replied. Mrs. Thomas, the real estate agent, a pleasant-looking woman, wearing a very smart tweed suit and a permanent smile, caught the unhappy expression on Leah's face. "Let me show you the bedrooms upstairs," she said, turning her smile on Leah. "They need work, of course, but they're very large. The second bedroom, I suppose that will be your room, Leah, is the brightest room in the house. The two windows face the front, and sunlight streams in all day long." "It's so dark in the living room," Leah said gloomily. She wanted to beg her parents not to take this house, but she knew it was hopeless. They had lived in 3 different houses in the past 7 years, all of them as run-down and creepy-looking as this one. "It won't be dark after I install track lighting," Mr. Carson said, eyeing the living room ceiling, then checking out the electrical outlets along the molding by the floor. "Come on upstairs," Mrs. Thomas said to Leah. "Be careful, the banister may be loose." Leah followed her up the stairs, which swayed under their weight, and seemed to groan in protest with each stair they stepped on. "The banister is easy to fix," Mr. Carson said cheerily. "I'd like to carpet the stairway," Leah's mother said, "and continue the carpeting down the landing here. Something light. It'll brighten up everything, make it look like new." "Yeah, sure," Leah muttered under her breath, knowing they would hear her, hoping they realized how unhappy she was. She was unhappy about moving to Shadyside in the first place. It had taken her so long to make friends back in Daly City, to feel comfortable and happy there. And just when she was starting to have a good time, her dad got transferred again, and she'd have to start a new school 4 weeks after the term began. "Wow, Leah, look how big your room is," her mother exclaimed, as they stepped into the big square room. The 2 windows on the far wall glowed with yellow sunlight. Squares of warm light stretched across the warm blue carpeting. "See, I was right about the light," Mrs. Thomas said, her hands in her jacket pockets, her smile solidly in place. "And take a look at the closet, Leah." Leah obediently walked over to the closet. "We'll pull up your carpeting first thing," Leah's father said, "and we'll sand the floors." Leah pulled open the closet door and stared into the vast black cavern behind it. She had a sudden chill. "It's like a cave, an animal's den," she thought. "What kind of creature is lurking in this dark cave?" "Did you ever see such a big walk-in closet?" Mrs. Thomas asked triumphantly, coming up behind Leah and gently resting a hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Thomas smelled of peppermint. Leah inhaled deeply. It was such a sweet fragrance in the old, sour house. "It's really big," Leah said, peering in, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. "It's as big as a room." Mrs. Thomas seemed very pleased by Leah's reaction. "Lots of closet space," she said. "Are you a senior this year, Leah?" "No, a junior." "My daughter, Suki, goes to Shadyside. She's a senior. I'll tell her to come over and say hi to you." Thanks, Mrs. Thomas," Leah said awkwardly. "Now, let me show you the rest of the second floor," Mrs. Thomas said, turning her attention back to Leah's parents. "There's a charming extra room that could be a guest bedroom or a study." Taking a last look at what would soon become her room, Leah followed them out into the hallway. Mrs. Thomas and her parents were nearly to the end of the dark corridor. She could hear Mrs. Thomas chattering enthusiastically about the possibilities for the master bedroom. "Hey, what's this?" Leah had stopped at a metal ladder bolted into the wall just outside her bedroom door. Peering up, she saw that it led to a wooden trapdoor in the ceiling. "Where does this go?" Leah asked. The 3 adults came back to where Leah was standing. Mr. Carson tested the metal ladder for sturdiness. "Must lead up to the attic," he said, staring up at the ceiling trapdoor. "Yes, there's an attic up there," Mrs. Thomas said, checking the notes on her clipboard. "Quite a sizable one, actually. Want to see it?" "No thanks," Leah said immediately. "Of course," Mrs. Carson said. "I love attics. When I was a little girl, I spent all my time up in our attic, playing with all the treasures up there." "Yeah, treasures," Leah said sarcastically, "like spiders and dirt and bats." Mrs. Carson gave Leah an unhappy look. "I really wish you'd make an effort." "To do what?" Leah snapped. "To get into this more," her mother said. "To be more cheerful, at least a little bit. It's hard for all of us, you know, not just you." Leah felt embarrassed. Mrs. Thomas was staring at her. She hated to be scolded in front of strangers. Why couldn't her mother ever learn? "Okay, wow, let's check out the attic," she said with false enthusiasm. She moved in front of her dad, bumping him out of the way, grabbed the sides of the gray metal ladder, and began to climb. "I think you just pushed the door away," Mrs. Thomas called up to her. "Just slide it off the opening." Leah reached up to the ceiling and pushed against the trapdoor with both hands. It lifted easily. She slid it off the opening and climbed a few more rungs to the ladder until her head poked out into the attic. It was hot up there, at least 10 degrees hotter than in the house. The attic, Leah saw, was all one open space, long and low. The ceiling followed the slant of the roof just above it. The walls were plasterboard, cracked and yellowing. A single round window at one end lit the entire area. "Climb on up so we can see it too," her father called impatiently. Leah pulled herself up into the room. When she stood up, there were only a couple of inches to spare above her head. Her father, who was 6'3", would have to stoop. "It's so beautiful up here," she called down to them, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I want to spend all my time up here with all the wonderful treasures." "Leah, give us a break," her father said, pulling his large frame through the narrow opening, then standing up as best as he could to check out the attic. A few seconds later, Leah's mom and Mrs. Thomas joined them in a low, stuffy space. "Not much air up here," Mrs. Carson said, fanning herself with her hand, her first complaint of the day. "This'll make a wonderful storage area," Mrs. Thomas said, scratching the back of her neck. "This place makes me itch too," Leah thought bitterly. Leah walked to the small round window. Through the dust-caked glass, she could see down to the driveway and a small corner of the front yard. Overgrown with weeds and tall grass, the afternoon sun was lowering behind the trees. Then she walked past the three adults to the wall on the opposite side of the room. "Hey, what's this door?" she called, her voice louder than she had intended in a closed-in space. A wooden door in the wall had been boarded up by a crisscross of 2x4s. Leah reached out and tried turning the doorknob. The door was locked. "What's in there? Why is this door boarded up?" Leah asked. The others joined her. Mr. Carson turned the knob, coming to the same conclusion Leah had. It was locked. He inspected the 2x4s. "Looks like someone boarded up this room a long time ago," he said, knocking hard on the door. It sounded thick and solid. Mrs. Thomas gripped her clipboard and held it tightly against her chest. The smile faded from her face for the first time that afternoon. "Well, that door is a very interesting story," she said, a little reluctantly, and then she quickly added, "I always think that mysterious stories add to the charm of a house. Don't you?" Leah felt a sudden stab of dread. She felt closed in. The walls seemed to be moving in on her, the ceiling lowering. She took a deep breath, her eyes examining the locked-up, boarded door. Leah's parents exchanged glances. Mr. Carson leaned back against the wall, his head bent down because of the low ceiling. "What kind of mysterious story?" Mrs. Carson asked, her dark eyes alive with interest. Mrs. Thomas continued to press the clipboard tightly against the front of her jacket. "Of course, most of the houses on Fear Street have similar stories," she said, speaking softly. "They're not true, I don't think. At least, they're not all true." She stared straight ahead at the brass doorknob. "You mean it's some kind of horror story?" Mrs. Carson asked, even more intrigued. Leah shifted her weight uncomfortably. "I don't really know the details," Mrs. Thomas said. "You know how these stories get lost or exaggerated over time. All I know is that there is a room on the other side of that door, and something terrible happened in that room." "Something terrible?" Leah asked. "It was 100 years ago. At least 100 years," Mrs. Thomas said, her face covered in shadow as the light through the attic window faded. "And someone was murdered in that room. At least, that's how the story goes." "You don't know by who, or why?" Leah asked, staring at the 2x4s that blocked the doorway. Mrs. Thomas shook her head. "A murder. That's all I know. And the room, it's been locked and boarded up ever since." A hush fell as the four occupants stared silently at the wooden door. Mrs. Carson broke the silence with a cough. "We'll just leave it the way it is," she said, looking at Leah's dad as if for reassurance. "Aren't you curious about what's behind it?" Mr. Carson asked. He hunched forward and knocked on the door again. "Hello in there! Anybody home?" he called loudly. They all listened as if expecting a reply. Then they laughed, nervous laughter. "No, I don't want to touch this door," Mrs. Carson said firmly. "We've got more than enough to do downstairs." "That's for sure," Leah thought glumly. "People make up these stories," Mrs. Thomas said, brightening. "I don't know why. As I said, there's a horror story for every house on Fear Street, yet the people I've met who live on this street are all as nice as can be." She edged herself back to the trapdoor and, with difficulty, holding the clipboard in one hand, began to lower herself down the ladder. "Come on, folks. There are some features in the kitchen I didn't get a chance to show you." Her parents disappeared down the ladder, but Leah lingered behind. She stared at the door, drawn to it and repelled by it at the same time. Did a murder really take place in this house? In this attic? In the room behind the door? And even if a murder had taken place there, why was the room locked and boarded up? For 100 years? Leah moved closer, closer, until she was standing right in front of the door. She pressed her open palms against the wood. She felt a chill despite the heat of the attic. On a sudden impulse, she pressed her ear against the door. Oh! What was that sound she heard? What was it? Was it breathing? No. No, no, no. No. The sound was that of her own breathing. Was she really breathing so hard? She stepped away from the door, feeling foolish. It was my own breathing, she told herself. There were no sounds from the other side of the door. I wonder what the room on the other side looks like, she thought, drawn to the door once again, feeling its mysterious pull. No, I've got to get downstairs now. She forced herself to turn around, to turn away from it. Still hearing her own rapid, fluttery breathing, she lowered herself down through the narrow, rectangular opening, carefully replacing the trapdoor in the ceiling. Chapter 3. "Yes, I know. He'll be here any minute," Leah said. Without realizing it, she had wrapped the phone cord round and round her wrist, and now she was having trouble untangling it. "I seem to be tangled up," she told Dina, holding the phone between her shoulder and her chin, and using her free hand to remove the cord. No, I'm not nervous or anything, Leah said, laughing. Just because it's 8 o'clock on Saturday night, and I have a date with one of the most popular seniors at school. Why should I be nervous, Leah thought. She pulled the phone as far as it would go so that she could take another look at her hair in the oval mirror above her dresser. Maybe I should get rid of these stupid bangs, she thought. I've had them since I was 10. Everyone is always telling me how cute they are. Maybe I don't want to be cute anymore. Maybe I want to be sophisticated now. Maybe I need a whole new look. Maybe I'll wear my hair spiky, get long, dangly earrings. Right. And maybe I'll grow 6 inches so everyone won't think I look like some sort of pixie. So cute. What, Dina? I'm sorry, I wasn't listening, Leah admitted. Dina chattered excitedly in Leah's ear, while Leah pulled at her sweater, rearranging the collar. Yeah, sure, I'll call you tomorrow morning, promise. Leah realized she had the phone cord twisted around her wrist again. I've got to calm down, she told herself. I'll be a nervous wreck by the time Dawn gets here. Licking her lips, she glanced at her desk clock for the 1,000th time. 8:10. What, Dina? What are you doing tonight? Dina's friend, Jade Smith, was coming over, and they were going to do each other's hair. Oh, wait, I think I hear the doorbell, Leah said excitedly. She held the receiver away from her ear and listened. Was she hearing things? No, it wasn't, she told her friend. This old house makes so many noises. Yeah, I know. Listen, Dina, I'd better get off the phone. Yeah, I'm hearing bells. Talk to you tomorrow, okay? Say hi to Jade for me. No, don't cut your hair. I think you should let it grow. Yeah, okay, bye. She replaced the receiver, which was wet from her sweaty hand. Picking up a bath towel she had tossed onto her bed, Leah dried her clammy hands, listening for the bell. She paced back and forth for a while, catching glimpses of herself in the oval mirror as she passed. The desk clock read 8:23. Where is he? She sat down on the edge of her bed, tossing the bath towel to the floor, and picked up Georgie, the stuffed tiger she'd had since she was a baby, her special stuffed animal. She squeezed the tiger tightly, hugging him to her chest. What am I doing? She asked herself aloud. She tossed the worn, old tiger gently onto her pillow, and picked up a copy of Sassy magazine. An article called 20 Intriguing Things to Say on a First Date caught her eye. She started to read it, but because of her nervousness, the words blurred until there were just black blotches on the page. She tried flipping through the magazine, just scanning the pictures, but she didn't have the patience or concentration for that either. Leah tossed the magazine across the bed, sighed loudly, and climbed to her feet, uncertain what to do next. Leah? Her mother's voice startled her from the bottom of the stairs. Leah? Yes, Mom, Leah shouted from her doorway. Aren't you going out tonight? Her mother called. Leah wanted to murder her. Mom, I've told you 1,000 times that I'm going out tonight, she shouted angrily. What's the matter with you, anyway? Whoa, Leah warned herself. Don't take it out on Mom just because you're nervous about Don. He's a little late, I guess, Leah called down in a softer tone. Her mother didn't reply. Leah could hear her walk away from the stairway, could hear her shoes scrape against the floor, hear the old floorboards creak and squeak. She turned to check the clock once more. 8:32. I'll call his house, she said aloud. She took a deep breath. But I don't know his number, she thought. She crept downstairs to get the phone book from the front hall closet. She didn't want her mom or dad to see her, because then she'd have to explain that she was calling Don's house to see why he was late, and that would just be too embarrassing. Phone book under her arm, she hurried back up the stairs, the wooden steps groaning annoyingly as she climbed. A few seconds later, she found the number. Her heart was racing as she punched it in and listened. 1 ring. 2. Hello? A woman's voice. Most likely Don's mother. Hi, is Don there? A brief pause. No, he isn't. Who is this? Oh, this is Leah. Leah? There is a loud crackling on the line. Leah Carson? Leah said loudly, trying to be heard over the static. I'm sorry to bother you. Don was supposed to pick me up at 8 and... But Don's out with Marcy, the woman interrupted, sounding very confused. What? He left about an hour ago, dear. But that's impossible, Leah cried. Then she immediately felt embarrassed. Are you sure you have the right number? Don's mother asked. No, guess not. Sorry, Leah said. She hung up quickly. The room seemed to close in on her. The antique mahogany dresser, the roll-top desk that had been her father's, the half-empty bookshelf, the cartons stacked against the wall that she hadn't had time to unpack. They were all sliding toward the bed, surrounding her in a tighter and tighter circle. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, everything was back in place. Don's mother must be mistaken, Leah thought. Maybe Don told her he was going out with Marcy, because he didn't want to get into any lengthy explanation about me. Yeah, that must be it. But where is he? The clock dial seemed to throb, glowing brighter and brighter until she had to force herself to tear her eyes away from it. 8:47. I'm not going to sit around here and drive myself crazy, Leah decided. Without really thinking about it, she opened the Shadyside phone book. Her trembling finger rapidly ran through the H's. Hendricks, 342 Canyon Road, Leah read aloud. Sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed and leaning over the small night table that held the phone, she punched in the number quickly before she could change her mind. Someone picked up before the first ring had ended. Hello? Leah recognized Marcy's voice at once. Marcy, it's Leah Carson. I don't believe it, Marcy said, not into the phone, but to someone else at her house. Leah, she said into the phone. Marcy why did I call her? Leah moaned to herself. This is so embarrassing. I'll never live this down. Never. Marcy, is Don there? Marcy's laughter burst into Leah's ear, cold and cruel. Marcy? Marcy stopped laughing abruptly. Leah, I can't believe you fell for it, she said with false hilarity. What? You didn't really believe Don would go out with you, did you? Marcy continued. It was a joke. Now, wait a minute. Leah could feel her anger rising, replacing her embarrassment. No, you wait a minute, Marcy snapped angrily. Why on earth would Don go out with you? He's going with me. It was all a joke, Leah. I dared him to ask you out, but I never dreamed you'd fall for it. Marcy held her hand over the mouthpiece. Leah could hear her muffled voice saying something to someone else, probably Don. Well, that will teach you to come on to my boyfriend, Marcy said nastily. Have a nice night. The phone clicked loudly in Leah's ear. Leah slammed down the receiver. Then, with a cry of anger, she fell forward on her bed, burying her face in the pillow. This isn't happening, she thought. She pressed her face into the soft darkness of the pillow and stifled the urge to scream again, to scream and scream and scream. What good would it do, she asked herself. It would only bring her parents, and she definitely didn't want to see her parents. She didn't want to see anyone ever again. I'll run away, she thought. I'll take the car, I'll drive and drive and drive till I fall off the earth. No, I'll drive and drive and drive till I run over Marcy. Realizing that she was suffocating, Leah pulled the pillow away from her face, but she didn't move from her face-down position on the bed. Marcy is such a liar, she thought. Liar, liar, liar. It wasn't a joke when Don asked me out in the lunchroom. He meant it. He really wanted to go out with me. Marcy forced him to do this. Yes, that's it. Marcy found out about it and forced him to break the date, of course. And now she was lying, saying it was all a joke, that she had planned the whole thing, that it was just a stupid dare. For sure, it wasn't a joke. Don is much too nice a guy to do something like that. Much too nice. Leah thought about how cute Don had looked down on the floor, helping her pick up her lunch. She thought about Don's shy smile when he asked her out, how nervous he suddenly became, how his eyes kept darting to the lunchroom door. No, it wasn't a joke. Marcy had forced Don to do this. Liar, liar, liar. But then, if it was true, why hadn't Don called her? He could have called and explained, or made an excuse, any excuse. Why had he gone along with Marcy's cruel joke? Was he afraid of Marcy, or was he just as cruel as she was? No. Confused and angry, feeling terribly sorry for herself, Leah picked up her stuffed tiger and clutched it tightly under her chin. You would never betray me, would you, Georgie? She asked it in a tiny voice. Sighing loudly, Leah kicked off the covers. She couldn't get to sleep. She'd been trying for the longest time. She pulled herself up onto her elbows and stared across the room at the windows. Curtains hadn't been put up yet, and silver moonlight filled both windows. The light was pale and lovely and made the rest of the room shimmer. I'll never sleep again, Leah thought. She thought about Don and Marcy and wondered where they were right then, wondered if they were still talking about her, still laughing at her expense. I've got to stop thinking about them, she told herself, but that was easier said than done. The creaking sound brought Leah out of her unhappy thoughts. She listened as the sound repeated. It seemed to be right over her head. There it was again. But it wasn't just the creaking of the house. Leah was beginning to recognize the groans and squeaks the old house made. This sound was too regular, too rhythmic. She lay back on her pillow, alert now, listening harder. There the noise was again. Footsteps? Yes, it sounded like footsteps up above her. But that was impossible. Hugging Georgie, she listened intently. The sound faded and died. Her imagination was playing tricks on her. Tricks, tricks, tricks. Just a joke. Just a trick. Trick, trick. With the word repeating in her mind, Leah drifted into a troubled, restless sleep.